Bonsoir et bienvenue. Welcome to the opening night of our month-long celebration of Martinique and Guadeloupe. My name is Christina Sealander-Bouzouina, and I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance Française in Minneapolis-St. Paul, and I'm the Honorary Consul of France here in Minnesota. Tonight I'm here with Natalia Karczmarchuk, our Cultural Events Coordinator, who will be handling the logistics. Thank you for joining us as we discover the history, geography, languages, and more of these two French departments in the Caribbean. With our guests, Audrey Lordinot, Professor Hanétha Vété-Congolo, and Professor Odile Ferly. And of course, our special guest, our diplomat tonight, Guillaume Lacroix, Consul General of France in Chicago. The island of Martinique in the Lesser Antilles has a population of nearly 370,000 people. Guadeloupe is a group of islands with a population estimated around 395,000 residents. Both Martinique and Guadeloupe are departments of France with exactly the same status as mainland France, and French laws, regulations also apply. As integral parts of France, overseas departments are represented in the National Assembly, Senate, and Economic and Social Council. They vote to elect members of the European Parliament and use the euro as their currency. The overseas departments and regions are not the same as overseas collectivities, which have semi-autonomous status. We're honored to have Guillaume Lacroix, Consul General of France, here with us to say a few words as we inaugurate this series of events and learn and celebrate two French departments. Born in Auxerre in the Burgundy region, Guillaume Lacroix became Consul General of France in Chicago in August 2017. He oversees the relations between France and the Midwest, 13 states of his circumscription. Consul General Lacroix has been to Minnesota many times and has many diplomas from the Institute of Political Studies and Law School of Assas University in Paris. He speaks Swahili, a language he studied at the Institute of Oriental Languages in Paris and in the field on the islands of Zanzibar in East Africa. He started his diplomatic career in 1997, assigned to the Bureau of African Affairs at its headquarters in Paris, then to the French Embassy in Tanzania. In 2005, he joined the French Embassy in Washington. He also held two other diplomatic posts at the US State Department as part of an exchange program, and at the European External Action Service in Brussels. From 2013 to 2017, he served in the cabinets of foreign French affairs ministers as Counselor for African Affairs. Bonsoir, Monsieur le Consul Général, and thank you for joining us.
Bonsoir, Christina. Bonsoir, tout le monde. Good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity and the honor to be part of the celebration. It is a frustration not to be with you in the Twin Cities tonight. I guess we will have plenty of opportunities in hopefully not too distant future. But thanks to the technology, we are gathered here. I am very honored to share the floor with the professors and the speakers. It's wonderful to be able to celebrate this year again the Francophonie, the French-speaking community. The French-speaking community is not a community that is defined by a flag, that is defined by a national anthem. It's actually a community that has no border. Yes, there is an Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, there is an institution, there is a body representing countries. But beyond that, the French-speaking community is a community that is inclusive, that is diverse, and that is not a community where you are first and second-class citizens. As long as you speak French, you are a member of the community. You can speak French because it's your heritage, because it's the language of your parents, your grandparents, but you can also speak French because you've made the choice to learn French, a personal choice. And to me, this is the way I see the Francophonie. It's a community that has no border, no passport, and America is part of the Francophonie. Not that America has French as an official language. We are not that far in terms of ambitions, but at the very minimum, and it is to me a kind of maximum, there are millions and millions of French speakers in the United States. And that makes America part of the family. We are a big family, a family that is present on all continents, in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, in the Middle East, in America, in the Caribbean. That gives us, I think, a lot of assets, a lot of diversity, a lot of richness, if you will, but also power. And we don't want to exert our power to dominate. We just want to be part of the global citizenship in the 21st century. It is such a strong asset, and it is up to us, we, the French speakers, to utilize this tool and for the better. And what is the better? I'm a diplomat. It's peace, it's dialogue, it is the capacity to understand one another and listen. And I think the French language and the values that are associated with French language can do that. We are not the only ones. I'm just saying that I think it would be a pity if only one language or one culture will dominate the world. And the French-speaking community has the capacity to sit at the table and play a role. I speak on behalf of the French-speaking community tonight because this is the French language and I'm French. But again, this is such a diversity. Even within France, France is not limited to Paris, to Marseille or Burgundy, where I was born. My father is from Burgundy, but my mother is from Réunion Island, one other overseas island or territory that are part of the French nation. In les Antilles, in La Réunion, in the Pacific, in Mayotte, we are 100% French. We may be a little bit different, but we are 100% French, but also at the same time 100% Guadeloupéen, Martiniquais, Réunionnais, and with all the cultures that go with it. We may eat different food, we may have different accents, we may maybe use more hot sauce in our dishes than if you compare with the hot sauce that's served in Burgundy. And we use Creole. And Creole is a very, another strong asset of the French-speaking world. It's not a language that is defined by one territory or one type, it's a family of languages. And I'm not sure there is, actually I know there is no intercomprehension between the Creole of La Réunion and the Creole of Martinique or Guadeloupe, but the history of the language is the same, and this is an history that reflects so many things that happened to our territories. Slavery, domination, colonialism, but also influences. The Creole language is so much influenced by African languages, by African structure, by African grammar. Aimé Césaire was very convincing when he mentioned that. And that is, to me, an illustration of the strengths of Francophonie. This is our diversity. This is not just one language. There are so many ways to speak French, that so many ways to be a Francophone. And I should say, in my official capacity of Consul, I want to recognize that this is the Francophonie we love, and this is the Francophonie we want to make growing. I don't want to get into talking about the Caribbean because I have no competence to do that. But I have an official competence as a Consul to say that we are very proud to be present also on the African continent. And if you live in Minnesota, you don't have to go to Paris to go to France or to Europe. You can just fly just a couple of hours and you land in Martinique or Guadeloupe and you are in France, in Europe, but with more sun, with very good food and also a very, very strong culture and education system. I'm not going to make the list of all the authors that come from the islands of the islands of the Caribbean, but Aimé Césaire, but also Frantz Fanon and so many others. Gisèle Pineau. I'm trying to refer to the authors I love reading, and Maryse Condé and so many others. We are proud of our diversity, and I'm proud to be part of this event tonight. Thank you very much, Christina, et merci à l'Alliance française des villes jumelles, qui est une des plus dynamiques aux États-Unis, qui fait vraiment la fierté du Midwest et du consulat.
Oh, thank you, Guillaume. Before I let you go and we introduce our panelists and our speakers, could I ask you, can you choose a number between 1 and 44? We had a tombola, a drawing. One of our sponsors, Rhum Clément, donated a bottle of rum, and so we asked some of our participants who are joining us tonight, our audience, if they wanted to win a bottle of rum from Rhum Clément. So if you could pick a number 1 through 44, and Natalia will tell us which of our participants is the lucky winner.
I was born in 71, so I will say 17.
Natalia, who is lucky number 17 on our registration list for the Rhum Clément?
The winner is Dobson West.
Congratulations, Dobby West, on your new bottle of Rhum Clément. We'll reach out to you about picking it up here at our Alliance Française office in the near future. Félicitations and bonne dégustation. I want to thank our other sponsors as well, Best Buy, Stéphane Catelin, the Consulate General of Canada, the Délégation du Québec, and as I said, Rhum Clément. And now I am delighted to introduce my colleague and good friend, Séverine Bates. Dr. Séverine Bates is a native of Martinique. She received her master's and PhD in French from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, with a specialization in contemporary French and Francophone literatures. She also has a licence or bachelor's in history and a maîtrise or master's in ancient history from the Université Paul Valéry in Montpellier. I also went to Paul Valéry. Her research focuses on the interconnections between immigration, popular media culture, and identity politics in Francophone immigrant literature. Her other research and teaching interests include Francophone Caribbean literatures and cultures, discourse on race and national identity in France, and particularly French media representation of minorities. Séverine has taught at Alliance Française since 2015 and concurrently at university level for several years. In addition to being one of our most beloved instructors, she's also teaching right now at Macalester College and Gustavus Adolphus College as a visiting assistant professor. Dr. Bates, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you for this kind introduction. Thank you, Monsieur le Consul, as well, for your support and for these inspiring words. Without any further ado, it is my honor, true honor and pleasure to introduce to you our first panelist, Audrey Lordinot. Audrey Lordinot was born and raised in Martinique. She has a master's degree in English from Université Paris 3, La Sorbonne Nouvelle. She also holds a bachelor's degree in business management and in cultural management. She was a director of La Maison du Ballet in Martinique from 2003 to 2008. This cultural center, dedicated to traditional ballet dance and music, has become a reference on the island and also in the field of world music. She has produced 2 albums with Les Maîtres du Ballet, acclaimed singers and tambour ballet drummers, aged 70 years old and over. In addition to that, she accompanied several artists in the field of theater, music, and dance in their development in Martinique, Guadeloupe, French Guiana, and Paris from 2009 to 2016. Besides, she also coordinated the activities of HF Île-de-France, an association fighting against gender inequalities in the arts and culture from 2014 to 2015. She has created a website dedicated to cultural and artistic activities in Martinique in 2017. Through that media, she aims at offering a better view of the local culture calendar, providing artists and cultural events organizers with a specialized media, and also allowing visitors to get a feel for the cultural life on the island. Audrey Lordinot has lived in New York since 2019, but she maintains a close link with Martinique as l'Officiel Martinique continues to exist. She has been teaching French as a second language at the French Institut Alliance Française, FIAF, since January 2021. When time permits, Audrey Lordinot enjoys playing the guitar and singing Caribbean classical and French pop by the beach after a good swim. So today, in her presentation tonight, Audrey will focus on the island of Martinique and Guadeloupe, on their history, geography, and culture, then and now. Please welcome Audrey Lordinot.
Sorry, I was mute. So I'm very pleased to be able to give you a presentation of Martinique, the island where I was born and raised. So I'm going to share my screen to show you a few. Okay, welcome to Martinique. As an art and culture lover, my perspective will probably be influenced by my tastes, but I'll try to be as broad as possible in order to give you the different information. First thing first, where is Martinique? Martinique is, as Christina said, in the Lesser Antilles, between St. Lucia in the south and Dominica in the north. You can see that Guadeloupe is just above Dominica. Martinique and Guadeloupe are two French departments in the Caribbean, the only ones. Madinina was the Carib name for the island of flowers. It's a tiny island of 431 square miles, and it has less than 400,000 inhabitants. Martinique has a tropical climate, just like Guadeloupe, with around 80 degrees all year long. As for the landscape in Martinique, we can, there are three clear visible regions. The northern part, which is mountainous and green, rather green. The highest point on the island is Mont Pelé, a volcano that you find in Morne Rouge, which erupted in 1902. The northern part has dark sand beaches. The southern side, the second region, is more flat and drier. It is where you will find most hotels, most touristic infrastructures, and white sand beaches. And the center of the island is the place where you find most companies which are registered and operate. Martinique and Guadeloupe are unique because they are part of a major industrial world power, France, which is in Europe and which is 8,000 kilometers or 4,900 miles away from Martinique and Guadeloupe. Martinique and Guadeloupe are situated in the south of the equator, in the region that we could call third world. And that is one particular paradox. The other thing is that Martinique is administered by France, which is that far, which is also separated by 5 or 6 hours. The time difference is that one. So France, as you see, President Macron in Martinique, France administers Martinique, and there are also locals elected who deal with certain matters. The official language in Martinique and in Guadeloupe is French, and most people also speak Creole. So in schools and administrations, people speak French, and more and more pupils learn Creole. As for the history, Martinique and Guadeloupe are situated in the Caribbean, the American region, which has a violent history. The first inhabitants were the Arawaks, a tribe of Native Americans. They were there until 1350, when the Caribs, another tribe of Amerindians, came and chased them to settle. Both Martinique and Guadeloupe were discovered in 1493 by Christopher Columbus. And by the beginning of the 17th century, the French colonists came and settled, wiping out the Caribs. That was the first episode of blood spreading. Then the colonists needed to grow sugarcane, coffee, and indigo plants, so they brought in slaves, African slaves. slavery started and was abolished. I'm going very fast because I have a very short time, but slavery was abolished in both islands in 1848, on 22nd of May in Martinique, and on 27th of May 1848 in Guadeloupe. 5 days explained by the time for the news to arrive from one island to the other by boat. And once it was abolished, the settlers, the colonists' descendants, who owned most of the land, still needed workers. So they brought in Indians and also people from France and from Africa, who were free workers this time, and they came to settle in Martinique. By the end of the 19th century, another immigration in Martinique from China, from Palestine, and from Lebanon. And that explains why today's society is so mixed in Martinique and in Guadeloupe. I will let Odile precise if there are specificities, but in Martinique, we have a mixed society with about 93% Black and mixed race, 3% whites who are French and Béké. Béké are the colonist descents. And that is it for the history. Now let's talk about economy. Today, the unemployment rate in Martinique and Guadeloupe is twice as high as in France. We have 15% in Martinique, 21% in Guadeloupe in 2020, and 8% in France. Like other Caribbean islands, Martinique and Guadeloupe lack natural resources to support their economic growth. They are not self-sufficient. They import goods from Europe and the US. However, because of their political assimilation to France, the islanders, Martinicans and Guadeloupeans, standard of living remains well above that of most Caribbean countries. Agriculture, which was once the main wealth, today consists mainly in banana and sugarcane. Sugarcane, which allows us to produce rum, one of the best rums around the world, as the person who won the bottle of Clément will discover it soon. So this agricultural sector only represents 6% of the gross domestic product today. The secondary sector, the industry, consists in Martinique in the production of food, transformation of food, an oil refinery, and the production of construction like cement. And it's only 6% of the GDP. Finally, the tertiary sector, which are the services and administration, tourism, it's 80% of the gross domestic product. 4 workers out of 5 work in this sector in Martinique. You can see in the middle Bernard Ayotte, who is a Béké, a descendant of Colon. The Béké represent a small minority, as I said a while ago, only 3%. And but they control 40% of the malls on the island, and this causes tensions because of the class differences between the Béké and the majority of Black and mixed people. Martinique's culture now. I will focus on 3 points. First, food. I know everybody likes to eat. Well, that is rare that people don't. So food in Martinique and Guadeloupe is a mixture of French, African, Amerindian, and Indian cuisine with specialties like colombo that you see over there, with spices like curry. Colombo, we make colombo with chicken, with all kinds of meat, and with fish. We do eat a lot of fish also. This is a fish blaf. Amerindians loved fish, and we still, because we are on an island, on islands, eat a lot of fish. And finally, this specialty is akra. It's eaten very frequently in Martinique and Guadeloupe as a starter in many dishes. The second point I'd like to focus on, the literature, because as the consul told us a while ago, there are many worldly known authors. So first, Aimé Césaire. Aimé Césaire in the 30s, from the Negritude movement, a famous author within the Francophone world. Negritude was a protest against because Negritude still exists, is a protest against French colonial rule and the policy of assimilation. and the authors of the Negritude claim their Africanity. Later in the 60s appeared another great author who is recognized around the world and is one of the greatest writers and thinkers of our times. It's Edouard Glissant, who came with another idea, the one of Antillanity. For him, we are not only African, we Caribbeans, but we are also made of our European and American heritages. And his works were a ground for the Creolity movement with Raphaël Confiant, Patrick Chamoiseau, and Jean Bernabé. Some of their books are there: Discours sur le colonialisme d'Aimé Césaire, Must Read, and La Lézarde, a novel grounded in the countryside of Martinique. Finally, not literature, but cinema, but I had to talk about Suzanne Palsy, who is a filmmaker, a director. She directed the movie The Sugarcane Alley. If you have not seen it, it is a must-see. It's a movie from the autobiographical book from Joseph Zoubel. The story takes place in the 30s in Martinique, where African descents working sugarcane fields were still treated harshly by their white employers. The movie was awarded several times internationally, and she is now a filmmaker in Hollywood. Back to literature, I have to talk about the existing writers, and I will mention Alfred Alexandre, who you might be able to meet on Wednesday. His writing is radically different to those of the Creole-ness authors, since while the first ones write about rurality with stories and characters from the countryside, Alfred Alexandre's writing deals with the problems faced in town today. So it's another point of view which is very interesting to hear. Now let's jump to music with two famous bands. Malavoie. Malavoie is the name of a variety of sugarcane, and it's also a Martinican band who was created in 1978. They play a fusion of traditional French West Indian dance rhythms like mazurka, begin, quadrille, heritage from our European encounters, and also foreign influences like salsa, even jazz and classical music are mixed in their music. The sound is very characteristic because of the presence of a section of violins, and the band has become an ambassador for Martinique. The group celebrated their 50 years in 2019, and let's listen to a piece of La Philo, one of their masterpieces.
T'es assise à souban la savane, mahogany assise au bon moins, en petites étoiles brillées, yo firmament, c'est deux yeux l'homme ou moins. Deux yeux l'homme ou moins, deux yeux l'homme ou moins, deux yeux l'homme ou moins, qui t'a éclairé moins. Si mon balai tenait en pharmacie, si mon balai tenait en pharmacie, tout jeune mon balai t'est que volé dans le ciel.
Okay, so I know you'd like to hear more, but please do so later on the net. Note that Malavoie released their latest album last December, and it's called Massibol. The second group I'd like to introduce you to is Kassav. Kassav is a Martinican and Guadeloupean band who invented our French West Indian music, zouk. In 2019, Kassav was the first French band to play in La Défense Arena, the venue before 40,000 people. Kassav has traveled the world. They have over 30 albums, and I propose that we hear an excerpt from one of their hits, sung by Philippe Laville, a French singer, and Jocelyne Béroir, their feminine voice.
Moi, je n'aurais pas imaginé que je te reverrais. Tant d'années ont passé, je vois que tu n'as pas changé.
Moi, pas de cas s'y poser, m'en te carry par les bas, m'en te même oublié, ça m'en te carry
Okay, so please feel free to listen to Kassav because there are many of their hits on the net. Sorry, I didn't want to do that. So next, I would like to finish with, we'd like to end my presentation with Damier Kalenda Bele, a specific cultural aspect of Martinique culture with music and dance. The instruments are a drum, tambour bele, that the man holds here. You play it with sticks, wooden sticks, tibois, that play the rhythm. There is a singer, there is a drummer sitting on the drum, and there are chorists and there are dancers. Damier Kalenda Bele is a group of 3 activities. Damier is the Martinican martial arts. And since the 80s in Martinique, a few associations had shown an interest for this tradition. Later, I had the opportunity to be the director of La Maison du Belay in Martinique from 2003 to 2008. And I worked with elders. You see one of them here, Felix Cazeus, who is about 80 years old now. And what we did a great job with them, with the elders who master the art of playing drums, dancing or singing. That's what we call the maître du belay. We did a great job, I was saying, recording 2 albums. One of them is here, the first one, making intergeneration gathers, touring in Europe and the Caribbean and Brazil. And we also met other traditions. Here you have Daniel Waro from Réunion with his Maloya. So we mixed our traditional culture with drums with other cultures from other countries based on drum. And why do I want to talk about it? Because it's interesting to note that today, ballet is widely learned on the island by young people. In many schools, there are ballet classes. It's played by women, as you can see here, while it was reserved to men before. It's also, this young man, Boris Renadelaide, lives in Brazil and he promotes ballet outside. The drum is a symbol of resistance. It was one of the slave means of communication, and the growing presence of Damier Kalenda Bele culture might reveal our ongoing search for a specific identity. It clearly relates to our African part, but our everyday life also reminds us that we have European, Amerindian, and Indian remnants. On the whole, I would like you to keep in mind that Martinique and Guadeloupe are small, rich, mixed, and complex places full of surprises and worth knowing. And now I want to thank you for listening, and I will be available if you have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. Now it is time for our second panelist presentation. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Odile Ferly. Dr. Odile Ferly grew up in Guadeloupe and holds a PhD from the University of Bristol in the UK. She is Associate Professor of Francophone Studies at Clark University. She is the author of A Poetics of Relation, Caribbean Women Writing as a Millennium, a pan-Caribbean study of recent women's fiction from the Francophone and Hispanophone regions that is largely indebted to the thought of Martinican thinker and writer Edouard Glissant. She has also published a dozen of articles on Caribbean literature. Her current research focuses on 21st century women's writing from the Anglophone, Francophone, and Hispanophone Caribbean, and on cultural politics in the French Caribbean. Tonight, Dr. Ferly will also give us an overview of the Guadeloupean archipelago by focusing on what makes it so special with its geography, history, and culture. Thank you. Please join me. Thank you, Dr. Oli, for your presentation. That's what I meant.
Thank you, Séverine. So I will share my screen. So yes, again, I will, a lot of what Audrey said is valid for both Guadeloupe and Martinique. So I will be just outlining a few aspects that are specific to Guadeloupe now. So the first thing to remember or know is that Guadeloupe is not an island, it's an archipelago made of two major islands, Basse-Terre, which is the higher land, and Grande-Terre, which is the smaller of the islands. And so they were not named correctly. And these islands here, Les Saintes, which is another archipelago, Marie-Galante, which sorry, Audrey, but this is where the best rum comes from. And then La Désirade, these are the islands. These are limestone islands, and these are volcanic. So that gives Guadeloupe a lot of geographic diversity, and the major islands are linked by a bridge, or by now it's two bridges. Soufrière, La Soufrière, there are many volcanoes in the Caribbean called Soufrière. There's a Guadeloupe, there's St. Lucia, there's St. Vincent, there's Dominica, but the one in Guadeloupe is the highest peak in the Lesser Antilles. You can see some of the variety of the landscape. So this is in the national park, in the forest, the rainforest. This is the mangrove in Sainte-Rose, which is north of Basse-Terre, of the island of Basse-Terre. This is Grand-Anse, one of the nicest beaches on the again north of Basse-Terre. And here we're on Grande-Terre. You can see the difference. It's much drier. This is the north of Grande-Terre, La Pointe de la Grande Vigie, and here is the east, La Pointe des Châteaux. And here you see Les Saintes, and you can tell that they have a problem with water. They have been taking the salt out of the water for decades. So part of the economy, as Audrey said, it's still mostly tertiary tourism, but the agriculture is still mostly monoculture, maybe bee culture, which is banana and sugarcane, and so that's inscribed in the landscape. Here you have a windmill, one of the few windmills that remain on the island. This one, I think, is in Marie-Galante, and that kind of leads me to the architecture that I wanted to talk about. Here you see a picture from Martinique of the typical, normal, in this case, perhaps not the most up-to-date dwelling, which is the traditional case. And as you can see here from a humble neighborhood, the wood is the primary material used for the traditional construction in Guadeloupe and Martinique. Many people now use cement, but it used to be wood, and it's still important. And then you have the zinc roof. Here there's also the zinc material, but that's not typical to have it on the sides. And of course, you can see the veranda here, also very, as I said, very popular neighborhood, and you can see that lady being freely making sure she's not getting too hot. Here you see the same type of architecture, but in a much more upscale way, much more touristy, with more ornate veranda. And the porch is very important. People really pretty much live outside. And here you have an idea of what the furniture looks like. Here, this is not necessarily very ancient furniture, but it was made in the style of the traditional style. local style. And here you have one of the houses. We're going up in social scale, social ladder with the colonial buildings from here. This is in Pointe-à-Pitre. These were the houses of the slave owners and descendants of slave owners. And that links me here to the fortress of Louis Delgrès. And that's going to be my next topic, which is history and memory. I want to focus on 3 events that are specific to Guadeloupe compared to Martinique. The first is May 1802. Abolition was actually, slavery, sorry, was actually abolished in 1794 during the French Revolution. But when Napoleon got to power, he reestablished it. Martinique never had that first abolition because it got invaded by the British to prevent abolition of slavery from happening. And in 1802, when Napoleon was in power, he decided to reestablish slavery. And Louis Delgrès, a Martinican officer from the French Revolutionary Army, resisted. He defected, and he fought the Napoleon's troops in Guadeloupe. He and his followers, about 300 men and women, resisted. They were first at the fort that's now called Louis Delgrès. Then they escaped in the heights of Matouba. And they had that slogan, live free or die. And I believe Maine or maybe New Hampshire has the same slogan. And so here you have a picture of the declaration of Louis Delgrès that he made on the 10th of May, 1802, announcing that he was going to rebel to prevent Napoleon from reestablishing slavery. And here you have a sculpture that was that's a memorial to Louis Delgrès, and that one is on the site of the fort that has a name. And you can see how the scattering of the sculpture is there to convey the explosion and what happened to the people. Another memorial to Delgrès, this time it's in Abîme. The Fort Delgrès is in Basse-Terre, Abîme is in Grande-Terre, and this is on a major avenue that has 3 sculptures dedicated to 1802. So this one is a memorial that is mostly for Delgrès, but also for his followers. And again, you can see this idea of scattered pieces, explosion, evoked in the sculpture. Solitude was one of the followers, and so she has her statue on the same boulevard. We call it the Heroes Boulevard. And then Ignace, Jean Ignace, who was another officer as well. The second event that I wanted to mention was 27th of May, 1848. So as Audrey mentioned, in Guadeloupe is 27th, not 22nd. And I just wanted to say that Guadeloupe has the Memorial Act, the museum dedicated to the memory of slavery that opened in 2015. There is some controversy about first the way that it was funded and how it was done, and also about the exhibit itself, but it's still a monument or museum that is dedicated to the memory of slavery. And it also has some exhibits of contemporary art, local artists. The third event that I wanted to talk about, memory of Guadeloupe, is May 67, which is, in 3 words, a strike that turned into a massacre. there were some construction workers who were asking for a raise that was denied, and the French government or authorities had the army shoot on the strikers. And on the following day, the French government took the opportunity to persecute the nationalists who were in support of the strike. And so quite a few died, were killed, persecuted. About 100 or 60 to 100 were arrested. 18 of them were sent to Paris and tried a year later. And here you have a burial, and you have the flag, the non-official flag of Guadeloupe here. And so that's an event that remained very unknown for quite a while. The people who lived through it were stunned into silence. They were shocked. And then the nationalists were the only ones who were really keeping the memory of that event. In 40 years after the event, there was a mural, which is in Pointe-à-Pitre, just next door to Memorial Act, that was put up here. So the whole mural with a detail of part of the mural here. And then in 2017, for the 50 years of the event, when the archives were open and people were hoping to find out the truth, but did not, because there was nothing in the archives. There were a lot of events to commemorate May 67, and in particular the Masapo, which is a specific type of carnival bands in Guadeloupe, organized some events from the beginning of the carnival season in January all the way to May, because May 67 is when the events happen. And so here you have Akiyo, who had their theme that was basically remember May 67, with the map of Guadeloupe on a target and some traces of blood. And so there were different variants of the costume. And I just want to say that these young men are the fouettards. They're typical of carnival bands, the Masapo carnival bands. And here you have the cart or the truck also with the map of Guadeloupe on the target, and the 2%, which was the raise that was being asked for. And so this leads me to my next point, which is carnival. But I don't want to talk so much about this type of carnival, nice and pretty and very appealing to tourists, which we call a snare drum band. I want to talk more about the Masapo or high drum bands, which are much more ideologically minded. And you can see here, for instance, in those costumes, that they pay attention to the materials they use. They try to be earth-friendly here, and they also there's an effort to try to go back to a carnival that is less aesthetically pleasing and has more meaning, but also is truer in the minds of the people who are in those bands, truer to the essence of Guadeloupe, the cultural essence, and the African roots are really very prominent in these bands. Here you have one such band, but putting showcasing the Carib, the Amerindian roots, is the Masaroku. And they also try to showcase the way of life of about 2 generations ago that has disappeared. Here, the peanut street vendors or the mattress makers. So this is a way of life that disappeared from the 1960s onwards, just at the same time as the economy went down the drain. And so here they also talk about, like any band of carnivore, about contemporary issues. And in this case, the theme was about malbouffe or fast food and the effects of the fast food on people's health. And I'm just showing a few details about those costumes. Again, the use of natural materials and the time that it takes to make these. And also another theme that's prominent in those groups is the ecology. And so here about all of these are actually plastic cups that have been cut and used. And it's about raising awareness about the effect of plastic in Guadeloupe. Guadeloupe has actually banned plastic bags about 10 years ago now. In Rhode Island, they just did so about a couple of years ago. And this is another such costume that was about plastic. And so this dress is made entirely out of plastic bags with some of the details here about how it was made here. And finally, I wanted to talk about Lena Blue, who is a dancer. She does contemporary dance, but she bases it on Gwoka, which is the equivalent of ballet for Guadeloupe. So the traditional dance that comes from slavery with the drum. And she invented the technica, which is based on one of the principles that she uses in it is what she calls Biggie D, which is all about being out of balance. And you can see this on this picture. It's the idea of precarious balance, which is for her a metaphor of the way in which Guadeloupeans or Antillians in general and people in the French Caribbean live, never certain of what is going to happen, never really in charge of their destiny. So, and so it's really a philosophy for her. She's really invented this new type of dance. She has a dance school, and I think that's a nice segue into Hanétha's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Odile. Our last panelist tonight is also a native of Martinique and a renowned expert of Caribbean cultures and literatures, Dr. Hanétha Vété-Congolo. Dr. Vété-Congolo is a Henry Wadsworth Longfellow Professor of Romance Languages and Literatures at Bowdoin College in Maine. She's also the chair of the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures and the president of the Caribbean Philosophical Association. She's affiliated to the Africa Academic Hub, as well as to the Women and Sexuality Studies programs of her institution. She's also a membre d'honneur of the research group on Black Latin America at the University of Perpignan via de Missia, France. Her scholarship focuses mainly on Caribbean and African critical thought, philosophy, literature, culture, and orality, and on discourses by women and about women of the Caribbean and West and Central Africa. She is the author of Nous sommes Martiniquaises, paroles en bouche de femmes châtaignes, une pensée existentialiste noire sur la question des femmes, published in 2020. L'interoralité caribéenne, le mot compté de l'identité, vers un traité d'esthétique caribéenne, published in 2011-2016. And she is also the editor of Le Conte d'hier, aujourd'hui, Oralité et modernité, of Léon Gontran Damas, Une négritude entière, published in 2015, and The Caribbean Oral Tradition, 2016. She has forthcoming books on French Caribbean women, thought and theory, Discours antillaise, and Le Féminisme, as well as two co-edited volumes on one of which is on African thought, Pensée africaine, with Adiba and Oumar Dia, and one on Francophone Black women feminism, entitled Pensée féministe noire francophone, Afrique, Amérique, Europe. Her poetry collections Avoir et être, ce que j'ai, ce que je suis, was published with Le Chasseur abstrait in 2009 and M'ont parlé de Guinée in 2015 with L'Harmattan. Her unpublished collection of poetry, Warmth of a Woman, was shortlisted for the 2015 Small Axe Literary Competition. Please join me in welcoming Professor Hanétha Vété-Congolo.
Merci Séverine. Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to my co-panelists as well, and it's a real pleasure being with you tonight. I thank l'Alliance française à Minneapolis and Monsieur Guillaume Lacroix, le Consul General de France at Chicago, for making this gathering possible. And I thank you, the public, for taking time on a Friday night to come listen to us on a topic of shared interest. And I surely look forward to our exchange through questions and answers afterwards. So the idea of Francophonie cannot exist in isolation, and this has been mentioned earlier by Monsieur le Consul, of all of the questions posed by the fact that French is never alone in the countries where it lives, except perhaps in France. Therefore, since we're talking about Martinique and Guadeloupe, I thought that focusing on Creole might be enlightening and shed light on the historical, cultural, and political questions posed by the linguistic situation of these Creolophone and Francophone countries of the Caribbean. So my focus is going to be on Creole. So no African language wholly survived the ordeal of enslavement in the Caribbean. And it goes without saying that the extinction of African languages implies figuratively epistemological silence. All the more so, concrete silence was explicitly demanded on the part of Africans by enslavers. And despite that, if African languages did not survive in their complex entirety in the Caribbean, it remains that many of their traits, linguistic and especially philosophical, are assumed by Creole. The latter language is a contact language born out of a miscellaneous constituents in the plantation context, which is a true concentration camp of all violences. I am interested in the ethical, the human and humanist responses Africans brought to their situation through language per se, and African languages principally. My interest rests first of all in the premise that language is the fact of a humankind. Secondly, in its metaphysical scope, and therefore in the importance of speech as it was deployed in the Caribbean. Speech in this reflection here is conceived as the set of statements articulated through language, and that renders a complex of thoughts, allowing to singularize the speaker's epistemology, political and philosophical values. This interest in speech springs from the fact that it subsumes power and empowerment through language, as much as it enunciates the enunciator's view and organization of the word through being able to speak it in a way that translates their own self in and vis-a-vis the word. So the crucial power and symbolic relation dynamic that unfolded in Caribbean history renders speech and therefore language primordial, with an emphasis on Martinique and Creole, of which I am a native speaker. I will pay particular attention to a form of the Creoles developed in the former French colonies, and is currently spoken in the French-speaking countries of Haiti, Guyana, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and English-speaking Saint Lucia, and Dominica. I am resorting to this new terminology, which is French African Creole, to name this Creole of Martinique, Guadeloupe, Haiti, Saint Lucia, and Dominica. I'm hoping that this reflection and proposition will help enlarge, firstly, discussions on the critical but relegated philosophical meaning contained in human behavior in the inhuman concept and practice of American enslavement, and secondly, on the ways deported Africans circumvented imposed boundaries and philosophically negotiated the inextricable changes their plight was pointing out to outside of Africa, and thus how they exerted pressure on the very notion of exclusive power within the slave paradigm, despite their seeming appearance of powerlessness. It's important to draw awareness on the way the same Creole that has been a site for philosophical and political empowerment and a repository for some of the most significant African metaphysical particularities. One of the crucial indicators of language, being a primary, if not the single most critical political coordinate of the history of the Caribbean, rests upon the use made of the African's organic tongue. While the enslaver had the power to cut off the enslaved tongue and thus irremediably compromise the African's aptitude to verbalize language and speech, which is in fact an admitted slave project, the enslaved exerted a counterpower by swallowing their own tongue, articulating in this way, as symbolically as concretely, a powerful political discourse, that is, their intrinsic choice of language and speech via silence. So for Africans who were enslaved in Neo-America, and especially in the Caribbean, language was severely problematized. To sum up, the cultural and linguistic plurality and diversity apparently pervading the colony of Martinique or of Guadeloupe will be reduced to one set of two languages responding to the need of the enslavers. The absence of the physical tongue through forced cutting or self-inversion, the negation of the African's ability to proffer sensible and complex language and speech, the use of the African language not to magnify a relation dialectic based on dialogical exchange, but to subdue them, lead to believe that there can be in America no African metaphysics pointing to a possible and valid African understanding and explication of the world and its phenomena as conveyed through articulated language. It's indeed crucial to insist on the philosophical impact the loss of original African languages has had on Africans under adverse circumstances, pressure, and forced displacement. For the African who passes from the force of complex vernacular languages, their native languages, for example, to limited vehicular modes of communications, the linguistic depression goes on a par with a symbolic and metaphysical depression, which points to the ontological, the identity crisis their group experiences. Spoken by the African descended majority people and comprehended from a racist light, Creole became, I quote, the most stigmatized of the world's languages. The context giving rise to Creole was one governed by the ideology of racism that denied any worth to Africa and Africans. As history amply suggests, therefore, one has to stress that had Africa not been involved in issues tied to Creole, the related academic controversy that spread from the 40s to the late 80s of the 20th century would not have been so intensely acerbic, which in itself makes compelling the consideration of language change and movement undertaken by Africans outside of Africa. So let's remember that in the 17th century, Dutertre, who was a French missionary in the Caribbean, in Martinique especially, and his contemporaries defined Creole as the gibberish spoken in the islands. In the French colonies, this jargon, this gibberish, generated by the socio-historic and linguistic conditions of the slave society, is also called le petit nègre, which signals its racialization and the fact that it is the language spoken by the African population. Although not a linguist, the most emblematic and charismatic Martinican poet, intellectual and political figure, Negritude proponent, Aimé Césaire, has also answered the question, what is Creole? Starting with the assertion that it is, I quote, the true language of today's Martinicans. In fact, in linguistic, and I could just quote Césaire, it's a long quote, but it's worth hearing what he has to say about that. How can one understand the Martinican society, the Martinican language, the true Martinican language, Creole, if one does not understand the fact that it is a language that was formed with French words or remnants of French words, but that has been restituted by throats implacably shaped by the rules of African phonetics, and that glued to that are the rules of the African syntax? This seems evident to me. In other words, if one does not want to remain at the surface of this matter, then one is forced to come back to the primary fact, that is, we are certainly mixed, but we are Africans of the diaspora. In fact, in linguistics, Creole exerts as much fascination as it creates misunderstandings that both generate myths. In addition, the racist approach inherited from the colonial narrative on Creole has often pervaded the field of Creole languages studies. The general trend since the 19th century has embraced an adverse position to Césaire's, relying on an approach favoring the contribution of the French language that provides much of the lexicon, and concerning the linguistic and grammatical approach, Creolist Élodie Jourdain, a Martinican Béquet who defended a PhD on Creole in 1945, concludes in her presentation of Creole as such: whatever traces of Carib, African, or other foreign words there may be in vocabulary, it cannot be denied that the construction of phrases is French. And it is difficult to say, as Mademoiselle Sylvain has done of the Creole of Haiti, that its syntax derives from the African tongues. And I've quoted. So in Le Verbe en créole martiniquais, Jourdain radically excludes any possibility of an active African contribution to the construction of Creole. Instead, she implies that although it is the language spoken by the African-descended majority of the Antilles, a majority who in no way can apprehend all of the intricate nuances of the French language modes, which would require a sense for analysis, according to her, Creole is a bequest of the French to these people, and I've quoted her. Although not settling the question and mentioning the possibility, but as a marginal probability, Marie-Christine Azaël-Massieu is not averse to an eventual polygenetic origin of Creole. As to Chaudançon, who calls Creole Créole français, French Creole, that is, thus implying the language one root identity, using the socio-historic and socio-linguistic situations of the Caribbean, he defines it as the produce of European colonization between the 17th and 18th century. Creole has been said to be but a vulgar simplification of French, which Chaudançon disconfirms. However, an African contribution to the genesis of the language by linguistic transfer is dismissed by him. This said, to him, I quote, "The massive arrival of Africans modified the mode of transmission of the European language." David Decamps notes, I quote, "a remarkable unity of French Creole that cannot be provided by the eclectic number of the African languages. Thus, according to him, I quote, there could not have been any real African substratum, that is, any transfer of the fundamentals of African languages. It was generally held that Africans could not have participated in the construction of such a mode of communication, for it required a physiological, educational, and intellectual adequacy that they were deprived of. In 1956, a news article of the Revue de Paris asserted that, I quote, "the Africans' thick lips and their thick tongue made the pronunciation of highly voweled French words extremely difficult. Since they did not know how to read or write, language was but an ear matter to them. They could catch but the accentuated syllables of words." And I've quoted. As to Jourdain, in her 1955 Le Verbe en créole martiniquais, she insists on the complexity of verb tenses and modes in Martinique and Creole, but concomitantly tells the reader that, I quote, "those who speak the language, that is, Black Martinicans, cannot be aware of the said complexity, especially of the abstract subtleties of the subjunctive mode, for analysis is not their prerogative. In the 20th century, prominent linguists have proffered the above racially oriented biases, and it is to be stressed that the latter biases spring from or are an inheritance of thoughts emitted by non-academic observers or visitors to the Caribbean from the 17th century to the 19th century. For instance, Victor Louis Garot started his exoticizing 1891 Trois ans à la Martinique with a section devoted to Creole, a language he says expresses anger well, is, I quote, Friday language, a wing language, or a mere simplification of the French language through an imitation which result was altered by defective hearing abilities of the Africans. He nonetheless advocates for studies to detangle this bewildering Creole language modes, but not without having first posited that the mispronunciation of simple French words by Africans was due to the congenital defects of their vocal apparatus from the pharynx to the mouth and ears. This sharp debate on the genesis of Creole and the insistence of linguists in considering the language as being exclusively parented by the French language is only cynical when one takes into account the fact that the Black population of Martinique, or even that of Haiti, have tended to repress Creole precisely because to them, it is a language too overtly reminiscent of traits they believe to be distinctive of Africa and of what is called neg, or Black, that is Africa's ordinarily appended kind. Through the active operations of the racist system deployed during colonization, both these values, Africa and neg, have been internalized by African-descended Haitians and Martinicans and Guadeloupeans as exceptionally marginal. Just like African languages were repressed or forbidden in the plantation, Creole was forbidden when I was a child and a pre-adolescent from the 70s to the 80s. In my family cell, like in most, if not all, of my friends' family complexes. It was forbidden at school, and most assuredly, it was categorically impossible to address any adult in Creole. Of course, all of this reflects the Bourdieuian and Passeron symbolic violence paradigm, and it has always been taken as an ingrained truism installed by very ambiguous racial impressions that only French could ensure its social elevation. The academic denial or belittlement of the African linguistic contribution into the formation of Creole has been corrected by many, among whom Mervyn Allen, with his 1972 Langue créole, dialecte, néo-roman ou dialecte néo-africain, or more recently by Maffers 2000 in the year 2000, Creole Genesis, evidence from West African L2 French, namely in the syntactic and lexical aspects of the language. In his 2015 Approche cognitive du créole martiniquais, Jean Bernabé adds that, I quote, "The contribution of enslaved Africans to the construction of Creole is to be found not only in the enunciative practices in their languages per se, but also into the interpretations they made of their European interlocutors' word." My present interest is to answer the following. If enslavers established Petit Nègre with the most simplistic and unethical perspective and structure, how did the contribution of Africans complexify it into Creole from the vision of their own linguistic conception, and especially through semantic and philosophical transfer? Because of the social and historical development of Martinique and the force of language in designing a culture, identity, and mode of thought, it's worth considering Creole not solely from the mechanic and limiting grammatical quantity, descriptive, technical, and linguistic lens. What took place in the Caribbean was not the mere result of mechanically applied commands or any exclusive quantity stimulus. It engaged the complex, non-discontinued interactions between human beings with some of the non-controllable aspects in any human matter. Many elaborated measures whether officially, legalist, or unofficial, were enforced to prevent the expression of African ways and thoughts, lest they supported a worldview itself suggesting any African power. In the case of Creole, the African presence occupies a key place as it concerns some of the most intrinsic and important concepts and values in the system of thought of Martinique. Given the way Martinique and French African Creole is invested with phrases that render these very appreciations and the way they are embraced by Martinicans, I'm inclined to pinpoint a strong presence of African metaphysics in the language. Through set expressions that typify French African Creole, the language certainly articulates the historical experience and critical human observations and facts. Nevertheless, the centrality of the expressions dedicated to defining or providing a perspective on the human person signals some of the philosophical choices Africans made in the face of their experience that attempted on the very notion and practice of humanity. It is true that Creole is replete with expressions advancing the African descended person as evil, which directly echoes the goal of the creolization process. But the anti-African and anti-human and social experience in the plantation exacerbated the African humanistic view on the human person. Africans therefore named the human person neg, similar to the very kind that is dismissed as human by and in the plantation system, where they were supposed to be meubles, furniture, or chattel slip. In Creole, the word neg, which in French is nègre, means as much male as it means person. It is easily understood that the word itself, neg, rooted in the racist French nègre, is a product of the enslavers' racial nomenclature and racist gaze to negatively distinguish the African. The African male was called not by their name, but by the generic racist word neg, meant to encompass what was regarded as their race. So to speak, they were called a race. The word négresse was bestowed upon female Africans. It has been retained in contemporary French African Creole, although less and less used. It is a feminine word in that women call one another négresse to mean friend or sister. However, it has not undergone a process similar to its masculine counterpart to represent a totality. The meaning of the word neg is here governed by the gaze of the enslaver, which is also maintained since neg means male. However, what is interesting is the way impelled by their awareness, their critique of the plantation dynamic and their understanding of a human person, the Africans use the racialized word to assign a counterpointing meaning to it. Indeed, they are able to discern which one of the racial groups testifies to inhuman comportment and attribute to the word that qualifies their group, a signification that translates their contradicting political and factual position within the plantation system. Where in Europe to name and define humankind, the European, that is male, the male, will use a gender-based approach and subsume the humankind as exclusively male and remit their outlook onto language, the word l'homme, which means mankind. In the Caribbean plantation, the African male is certainly impacted since the racialized effect is active, but they will make complex the process through circumventing the initial racial sense, and especially through articulating a vision of the human person within that plantation close to their original one. In the plantation, the enslaver articulates but racial statements they hold as authoritatively exclusive. In this the African too enunciates a powerful racial statement. In the plantation, the thoughts emitted and concrete acts performed by the enslaver in relation to humankind do not posit them as human. The local experience is fundamental at providing the references, but the process underlines a sense of discernment, also sourced in a larger vision of the human person. The local space sustains the strong racial coordinate of the word and implies boundaries to the meaning of humanity. For one does not say en nègre France, you don't say this in French, you don't say en nègre France to mean a person from France or a male person from France, but you say en moun France. The larger vision on the human person is deciphered in that the process signals a comprehension of what the humankind is, and that dismisses inhuman thoughts and behavior. The legacy of this word meaning in French African Creole today shows the extent to which the African speakers of the language contributed to providing the milieu with an episteme outside of the limiting slave concepts. Although bestowed by enslavers as thought and used in Creole by the Africans, the word nègre also stands for an African statement. A more or less comparable re-symbolization and re-epistemologization phenomenon was undertaken much later on in the early 20th century by some of these enslaved people's offsprings through négritude, who redefined the term nègre in French and forcefully anchored it positively within the Caribbean system of thought and speech. In the same vein, I want to propose another example, which is perhaps the most viable and pertinent African vision of the human person inscribed in Creole, and that indicates a critical contribution in the semanticization of the ecosystem phenomena on the one hand, and on the other, that points to the fact that through Creole, not only did a system of thought and of speech emerge under the influence of African epistemology, but in addition, it ensures a system of moral thought and moral language running counter to the slave system of ideology. In the traditional African perception of a person, Tangwa offers an expression in his natal Lamso language, Wanzevir, which means a human being is a human being is a human being purely and simply by being a human being. The Creole counterpart of this African phrase that is used in Africa today is in Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Haiti, tout moun c'est moun, which exacts the African meaning, all human beings are human beings, or human beings are human beings because they are human beings. The idea of human beings being irreducible and equal to human beings, that is to themselves, is in full operation in this Creole phrase. Moun could well be is actually from the Mande Mun, M-U-N, it's spelled in Creole M-O-U-N. And in any case, in Creole, the substantive mun stands for people. In its signifying all human persons are equal, tout moun si moun refers to a conception of the person and of human persons matters that holds equality, human rights, human dignity, and justice as essential. In Martinique, this phrase is said whenever someone experiences or identifies an injustice and acts as a reminder or a basic human principle, but also a warning that one is aware of the injustice and could defend themselves. It marks a strong disapprobation and clear positioning vis-à-vis ethics, and there again stipulates a political statement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hanétha. Thank you so much, Odile and Audrey, for your wonderful presentations and wonderful and insightful presentations. I would like now to passer le flambeau, to let Christina now take the lead. We're going to, if our audience, our public, has questions, we will be delighted to let our panelists answer them.
Thank you, Séverine. Thank you to all of our panelists. We do have a few questions in the Q&A and in the chat, and if other of our attendees have additional questions, please feel free to type those in. One, Victoria is asking, could you explain what you mean by African metaphysics?
Yes, thank you for the question. There are many ways to view the word metaphysics. It depends on the discipline, and here I stand more in the domain of moral philosophy. And so to speak, so the word is used in linguistics, for example. It's used in psychology, but here we're talking about a field that is philosophy, and especially moral philosophy, and more specifically aesthetics and ethics, which is where I do my work. And so metaphysics would, to go fast, it would be the manner according to which one views the word. And so it could be an equivalent to a worldview.
Thank you. Michelle is asking if there was a special reason that Napoleon reestablished slavery. Was it political or economical? Did he perhaps receive pressure from a special interest?
Oh, there definitely was, we said, a special interest of his wife, Josephine, but that's why she cannot keep her head, her statue cannot keep her head or its head in Martinique. But actually, that's a very good question, because within 30 years, many European powers decided that slavery was not economically viable. Slavery. So it is a good question about why he couldn't see that at the time. But I have to, I'm no historian, I have to assume that he made the economic calculation of he thought it was worth it. There was probably a political calculation as well to make sure that the enslavers, the slave owners would be on his side, because that meant they would be against. There was also the question of the French Revolution, and that the France was divided as itself, and so having the descendants of the Europeans, the enslavers, on his side was a way to ensure his power in metropolitan France as well. So,
thank you. Thank you, Odile. A few questions from Pascal and from Juliette about children and learning Creole today. Pascal is wondering, do children not learn Creole in the family in contemporary times?
Creole is one of the two languages spoken in the countries I cited, Haiti, Martinique, Guadeloupe, French Guiana on the continent as well. And as such, it pervades society. It is there, whether you want it or not. Well, it's just like we are in the United States, and I don't see how you could escape English. So indeed, you would carry it in your blood, if I may say. So this is not the point. The point is that it pervaded society, but you couldn't speak it, at least when I was growing up. This is not the case with my daughter, who is being brought up in Creole and French evenly, with no questions asked or thought about. So the question concerns teaching Creole in families, and so you don't really teach. It's there. It's so to speak the natural language, if we can use that expression. The true question to be asked is whether it's taught officially at school, and there are cases where Creole is taught, but not uniformly. It's more in the region of pilot cases, experiences led by certain schools that would need to have this ambition to do so, but it's not. France is a country where only one language is supposed to exist, even though there are what one calls the regional languages. So I would rather ask the question concerning the official teaching or the more democratically spread teaching of the language.
Speaking of teaching Creole in schools, Juliette asked, do you believe that the younger generations who are now learning Creole in school as an official language will have a different relationship to Creole than older generations who learned only French in school?
We all learn only French in school, and because that's the structure in place, except for a few of us. Mm-hmm. Like I just said, you would have to be lucky to be attending a school where the director might want to try and conduct this experience. But I did learn Creole very formally at college when I went to the university, and I learned with Raphaël Confiant. But again, it was in the early 90s when they were just starting to teach Creole officially. They were starting to create a structure which they ultimately succeeded in erecting, if I may say, with the work they did together, especially with Professor Bernabé, who passed away only a few years ago. So I have had this immense opportunity and luck and chance to be trained formally in Creole and have an understanding of the functioning of the language linguistically.
Fantastic. Audrey and Odile, maybe you could speak to this question. Our friend Nicole was wondering, has Martinique or Guadeloupe ever attempted to secede from France or state their independence? Do they remain affiliated with France for economic benefit?
Well, France arrived in Martinique in 1635 for economic benefits, to her sole benefit. That's why she went to this region, was to enrich herself. So if ever Martinique, Guadeloupe were deciding to remain in partnership with France, it would, and that it were for benefits, then it would perhaps be un juste retour des choses, n'est-ce pas? I don't, there are independent parties in both countries, in Martinique and Guadeloupe, and everybody can be a witness of that today, that they've not succeeded in leaving Motherland.
Thank you. Odile or Audrey, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I'll let Audrey speak to the 1950s in Martinique, but the May 67 event that I mentioned is precisely, that was the height of the separatist movement, and the show of force and the completely out of order response that the French government had for that event, which really shocked Guadeloupeans.
Odile, I think we're having a problem with your connection. Audrey, while we're waiting for Odile, Odile, I think you're back. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yes, so that really shocked the French government. So that speaks to the strength of the movement then.
Audrey, did you want to add anything about the earlier movements?
No, not really. I think what Odile says is would be the same in Martinique. I'm trying to find the question actually. Because of economic benefits, that was the question. Do they remain affiliated? Yes, I think today, even though there are still small movements of small groups of people who would be interested in seeding, but it's not effective because the majority of the population has economic benefits and they don't want to lose them. I think that's how France keeps their hand on our territories.
Is there a reparations movement in Guadeloupe or Martinique similar to what exists in the United States?
Similar,
Yes.
I don't know, but I will start. Okay.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. There is a reparation movement, and I think that is getting better and better structured, and that is also coming a long way, and that is also working with other reparation movements throughout the world.
Great. We have a few questions about differences in Creole, whether it's different in Guadeloupe, Martinique, Louisiana, Haiti. Would you speak to that, please?
I am tempted to say that these are perhaps the types of differences that you find between the English that is spoken in the US and that of England or Australia, for example, because they originate from the same root, function in the same way, and so the lexicon may change, but not substantially. So it's the same language. As to Louisiana, I don't know because I don't know enough about Louisianan Creole. So, but it's fun anyway. So it is it is akin to these Caribbean Creoles as well. But as to the Caribbean Creoles themselves, they are very much similar.
Thank you. Let's see. Annie, one of our members and friends, said she took students to Martinique in 2012 and 2015. She was struck by how the Béké and Martiniquais seemed to get along in school, both students and staff, but didn't seem to socialize outside of school. She was told, for example, that a Béké family would not want their child to date a Martiniquais. Did she understand the social situation correctly? And also, she was told that the Metropolitain could easily mingle in both groups, Martiniquais or Béké. Is that true? Séverine, yes. Do you want to add anything?
Oh.
I saw you nod your head or make a gesture.
I will let probably Audrey answer that question. I do have my opinion based on my own experience in the high school. They did not really mingle with us, that is true. But Audrey, I'll let you answer that question.
Well, in my experience, they did mingle in school, but outside of school, no. Indeed, they marry between themselves. There is a documentary, Les Derniers Maîtres de la Martinique, that you ought to see about the Béké family and how they are very much between themselves. And yes, it's easier and possible for French metropolitan to mingle with Béké.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
But if I may,
of course.
Well, this is here. There is a racial component to the situation the person is describing. This is a remnant, a result or consequence of history, and we are experiencing the same thing in the United States as well. Whenever it comes to whites and blacks, so I don't believe that whites and blacks mingle so much in the United States. It's the same situation in the Caribbean, where you've had a history based on the enslavement of Africans. by white Europeans and their offspring. So the consequences can never boil well for humanity and for humankind. So situations like that begs for separation and racist behaviors. And in Martinique, there also the racist behavior is found, observed. And I am, by the way, from Le François, that produces Les Rhums Clément, and this is where I am from there. And so, yes, indeed, I went to that town where the Béquets live in their numbers. This is one of the two places in Martinique where the Béquet population resides. And no, yes, I confirm, there is no social interaction, really. The interactions are professional, in the professional world, but not in the social and cultural world.
And I will confirm the same is true for Guadeloupe, and it is shocking. It is shocking how separate the populations can be. So the Béquets or the Blanc Pays in Guadeloupe, by the way, they are Martiniquais or Guadeloupean. They are part of these territories, even though they're the descendants of the enslavers. And then the Metro, at least when I was a teenager, they didn't mingle so much at all. And then the other Guadeloupeans who, as Audrey mentioned, are a mixture. But even then, we have to be honest, the Indo-Caribbean and Afro-Caribbean do not always get along, even though a lot of them are mixed anyway. So,
thank you. We are so grateful to our panel for being here and for all of our audience. I think we are running out of time. Monsieur le Consul General, merci beaucoup. Professors, Dr. Bates, Audrey, thank you for being here. Would any of you like to give a final word or share a final thought before we sign off for the evening? Okay, well, I hope many of you will return. We are meeting with Alfred Alexandre, the author, next Wednesday, March 10th. And 1 week from tonight, we will have a live cooking class with Chef Jérémy Jean-Baptiste as we continue our celebration of les Antilles françaises, Martinique et Guadeloupe. Thank you, merci infiniment et bonne soirée à tous.
Merci, merci tout le monde d'être venu. Merci.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci, au revoir.
Au revoir.
merci.